Jerry DeMarco is Canada's Commissioner of the Environment. He joins me now. Mr. DeMarco, first of all, good to see you. Thanks for taking time to speak with me. Appreciate it.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Look, why has this country's performance on climate been such a failure for the past 30 years?
It's been such a failure because we've had no shortage of plans and targets, but what we've had is a shortage of action to implement those plans and targets. 30 years of 9 different plans, 4 international agreements, but no net results.
Now, you've called for stronger leadership to get real progress. So what is it you think we need to see?
So at the federal level, we need to have a plan that actually is focused on achievement of the goals in it. So we've had a series of plans over the years, and the common denominator is that we get along on them, and as it looks like we're not going to meet the targets, we start talking about the next plan and the next plan, and it just goes on and on. What we need to now focus on are results, and that's why this report has been put out, is to remind Canadians that we've had a series of plans, we've had a lot of good intentions, we just aren't getting the results.
All right,
we need results.
Okay, I want to drill down on some of these issues in just a moment, a little deeper. But let's, you talk about plans. The major political parties all campaigned on climate plans. We just had an election. Can you say which one of those plans is closest to what you think the country needs and that has a clear roadmap for achieving results?
Well, none of the current plans will achieve what's needed. Luckily, the last Parliament passed a new law requiring a new plan to meet our Paris obligation, and our Paris obligation is for a 40 to 45% decrease in greenhouse gas emissions. So I'm expecting that the current federal government will come out with an improved plan either this December or by the latest by March in order to have a roadmap for meeting the Paris target.
You acknowledge in your report the continued reliance of the Canadian economy on the fossil fuel sector and how that's working against climate efforts. So what's the solution?
The solution is a just transition to a low-carbon economy. So we can't simply tell the regions of Canada that rely on fossil fuel development or processing to just, take one for the team and help Canada meet its targets. We need the federal government to provide leadership on lowering the emissions and transitioning those economies to the low carbon future. Without that, there won't be the support for the emissions reductions because people will feel like their livelihoods are being threatened by these emissions reductions.
Let me ask
That's the key.
And let me ask you about that. In that same context, your reporter also talks about the polarization of the conversation in this country over years on climate change, and it continues today. And some of that has to do with where the resource-producing parts of this country are located and the jobs that are involved in those in fossil fuel-producing industries. So, how do we make that conversation less polarizing so that there's, in effect, a national effort to deal with climate?
We're getting there. The public awareness of the issue and the political awareness of the issue has improved greatly just over the last 5 or 10 years. It's no longer a difficult conversation to have with someone as to the importance of dealing with avoiding catastrophic climate change. We have some hard reminders across the country just this week in Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and British Columbia. I think people understand the magnitude of the problem, and I think they've been expressing that to their representatives. So now those representatives have to reflect that public will and get beyond unnecessary debate over climate change and focus on cooperating towards the common goal of saving the planet and Canadians from catastrophic climate change.
I think, if I can say so, your report as well, goes to some length to talk about what are obvious contradictions in the efforts. For instance, you refer to the government's purchase of the Trans Mountain Pipeline as policy incoherence in efforts to make progress on climate change. Tell me what you mean.
So policy coherence is necessary to affect change. That means getting everyone on the same side, working towards a common goal. Examples in our report show that sometimes Canada will create a goal, but then short-term decisions made by government or by individual departments run contrary to the goal. That's policy incoherence. In other words, two departments pushing on the opposite sides of the large rock that they're trying to push up the hill in terms of the climate change agenda. The examples in our report might account for the fact that we haven't been meeting our targets and that emissions have been going up despite individual programs that are supposed to add up to reductions.
Right.
The net effect has been negative.
Okay, so buying the Trans Mountain Pipeline, that's policy incoherence.
That's a good example, as well as the Emissions Reduction Fund, the other example in the report today.
Right. Let's talk about that. $675 million in the Emissions Reduction Fund. It was created by the federal government, I think last year it was, during the pandemic to support the oil sector when prices crashed and to help them cut emissions at the same time. You say that program didn't work. Why not?
Well, because it's called an Emissions Reduction Fund, and the department couldn't even tell us if there were net reductions in emissions. Just because there's a pandemic, it doesn't mean that you just throw money at a sector and hope that there will be net reductions in emissions. You've got to actually have the measures in place to track that. Same with their other objectives on saving jobs and increasing investment in the sector. They weren't tracking these things. You can't just subsidize an industry and hope for the best, especially when you've already committed to trying to transition to a low carbon economy. That's policy incoherence. That's working at odds with each other.
The government side pushed back on the Emissions Reductions Fund, disputed your findings. What does that tell you about, this? I mean, if we've got lots of plans but no action, and you point out, policy incoherence, and the response is, yeah, we don't buy what you're selling. How concerned are you about that posture?
Very disappointed at the responses from the department. I would have expected, just for this example of the Emissions Reduction Fund, even the rationale for the program, which were depressed commodity prices in the oil and gas sector, that's changed completely since they launched the program. Yet they're still continuing on, giving us responses that are non-committal. It's disappointing to see, and it's an example where these short-term expedient decisions, whether it's the Emission Reduction Fund or another example, they get in the way of our long-term goal, and getting in the way of our goal means jeopardizing our children's future.
All right, Jerry DeMarco, Canada's Commissioner of the Environment. Great to talk to you. Thanks for your time today, and we'll talk again.
Thank you, Peter.